Looking forward to discussing a few more chapters in Untracked. We have a different setting this morning. You may notice that it looks different. What is behind us? We do have family with us this weekend, so we are accommodating, and we've moved where we are doing this webinar. So that's what you see behind us, and you may pick up maybe some extra noises as well as the family's up and about this morning. But thank you to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this morning. Just a couple logistics in case you're not familiar with this setup in a webinar. We love interaction, so we have a couple of options so you can interact with us as we go through this webinar. You will see a chat box on the top right of your screen. If you have any questions or comments as we discuss the chapters this morning, you're welcome to plug in those questions or comments at the bottom of that little chat box and send that off, and that will come to Ben and I, and we will notice it from our end and we will respond accordingly during the webinar. So don't hesitate to use that, or if you prefer, you can also join us using your microphone. Below the video on your screen, you should see a button that says Ask a Question. If you click on that, that will also prompt us at this end, and we will turn the mic over to you to respond as you would like to. So I think that's it as far as logistics. As way of introduction into the chapters this morning, as I spent some time with this material yesterday and again early this morning, I decided I would just share with you what kind of jumped out at me in each of these chapters. And it was interesting because we did get some responses in this morning via email, and one of the responses was did a similar approach. I'm going to share their response as well as to what stood out from them. But we have the 3 chapters this morning, and I'll start with and I love the titles of these chapters. I think the titles of the chapters are intriguing enough to want you to go read what it's about. So the first chapter we read this morning was Due to Others, 3rd grade and a Bad Hair Day. And Ben shares a great story of his growing up years. But what stood out for me in that chapter was, do I extend grace? Do I extend love? Or do I extend acceptance when others are acting out? I think in the discussion questions, the question may have been the reverse of that, but it made me ponder, how am I responding to those around me? Do I extend the love and grace as Ben's 3rd grade teacher did at the appropriate times? Then in the next chapter we talked about, or the title of that chapter is 300-Pound Jesus. That's a great title. And again, Ben shares another story of something happened in his, I believe in his early 20s, if I got that right. But what stood out to me in that chapter was, excuse me, the end of that chapter, where he includes a quote from C.T. Studd. And that quote was, "Someone to live within the sound of church or a chapel bell. I want to run a rescue shop within the yard of hell." And again, that quote challenges me. What am I doing in my life to run a rescue shop within a yard of hell? And I shared that with Ben earlier this morning, and I found out that he was kind of thinking along the same lines as far, what are we doing as individuals or as a couple to run a rescue shop within a yard of hell? It's a great question to ask ourselves, and what are we doing in our own lives to pursue that, or what does that look like in our lives? And then finally in the 3rd chapter, which was Wisdom is Known by Her Children. Again, it was at the end of the chapter again, the sentence that stood out for me was that last sentence, and it made me question myself. What am I doing to best model my life around Jesus and his crazy cousin, instead of modeling a bunch of religious experts? So those are just thoughts that jumped out at me. And if you have thoughts that jumped out at you as you were going through the chapters, don't hesitate to share that as well. We would love to hear those. The other response that came in that shared his thought between the 3 chapters was the quote where it says, "I don't care so much if they act like Baptists, Presbyterians, or the non-religious. I just want my kids to hang out with real people and passionately live to make the world better for them." Great stuff. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and he's going to continue sharing his thoughts on these 3 chapters.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be here this morning, as it always is. Listen, These three chapters are just fun for me. They're fun because of kind of how they fit into my life. That first one, due to others, the third grade and a bad hair day. Yeah, that story to me, it's funny how some things are just planted in your mind and you have them there. You don't even know why those were so memorable, but this one, I can remember it. I can so clearly remember exactly what it was like when my mother was cutting my hair. I can remember this creeping up the side each time because she got one side cut too short. And then she'd try to cut the other side the same and get it a little higher yet. And uh, I'm not sure why she was ever trying to cut my hair, but it was okay. It was okay. Uh, I I've never felt like I needed to hold it against her or anything, but I do remember that so clearly walking to school the next morning. And that's what I did. I walked to school. It was about a mile because they had just changed the school. In fact, after my second grade year and going into third grade, they had moved us to a new school. And I'm outside that classroom door, and I cannot make myself go in. And I remember my third grade teacher. I liked her, but I remember her as tall. I don't know how tall she really was. A little bit red haired or auburn haired and stern. Not stern and mean, but stern. And but I can tell you that day when she walked outside that door, and I cannot tell you why she would have known I was outside. Maybe one of the other kids said Ben's outside. I don't know. But when she walked out that door and took one look at me and saw my hair almost no hair, very little, because my father had to recut everything and just take it down to almost nothing to make it even. She took one look at me. I have no idea what crossed her mind, but I do know her eyes. I know that day she looked at me and everything inside of her went soft. I don't remember what she said, but she walked me into the room. She told all the kids something. It must have been something about my hair, that how cool it looked or something, because the kids loved my haircut after that. And to this day, that story is meaningful to me. And it's meaningful because when I see somebody that maybe is doing something that's not in their usual character, and maybe I don't even know if it's in their usual character, but they seem to be acting out, I realize something, that someone showed me one time what Jesus taught me in his words. She showed me better than I could have ever learned by somebody telling it to me. That the best thing I could possibly do, the most important thing I could possibly do, is to treat someone else exactly like I would like to be treated in the circumstances of my life that are difficult. Obviously, now that seems like such an insignificant thing, but to a third grader at that time who wanted to be liked by everybody, a bad haircut was a horrible thing. And I had a teacher that discerned it. And she turned it into a good thing. And I know she's long dead because she was fairly old at that time. She's just a little third grader at least. But let me tell you something. I love her. I love who she was at that moment in my life. And I want you to hear something because Jesus isn't the only one to say this. And probably every religion in the world somewhere has this as a foundation point of their religion. But it's maybe one of the least followed tenets that we have. We talk about it a lot, but it's very difficult when we put all of the other pieces of religion in and make it complex. It's very difficult for us to follow this one as we ought to. That's simply this. There is nothing, nothing else that makes any big difference at all. If we follow this one, we've done it all. And that's simply this. Treat others the way we would want to be treated. Treat others just like we hope others would treat us. How simple is that? It's one of the two places Jesus says, if you do this, you fulfill everything that's in all of the other stuff. All the law is fulfilled. Everything the prophets talk about is fulfilled. It's interesting because Paul, in the 13th chapter of Romans and also in Galatians 5, says exactly the same thing. This must be really important, obviously, because it's quoted again and again. And he simply says, if you treat others like you'd like to be treated, you have simply fulfilled everything God ever wanted you to be. How interesting that is. I can tell you that with my own kids and with those that through the years I've wanted to minister to and have ministered to some of them, and that if they begin to treat others like they would like to be treated, everything inside of me says, that's all I need to accomplish. I can tell you that there isn't any other thing that's important. I don't care if culturally they're different than me. I don't care if they didn't grow up learning all the things I learned. If they start looking at other people and saying, I'm going to treat them just like I'd like to be treated, respect, with that grace that Karma mentioned just a few moments ago, with love, with understanding, with forgiveness, just like we would like to be treated. Have you ever done something wrong and you know it? But you hope that that the people around you saw you not for what you just did wrong, but who you are or who you want to be inside, and so they treat you with regard for that. Treat others that way. There isn't anything more important than that. And 300-pound Jesus. Rev, I've got so many stories with Rev that I could tell that are amazing. I love that man. He's the only man that I've often said could just ream me up one side and down the other and be hugging me at the same time. And I always knew, and I think everyone around him knew that no matter what he said to you, because he had all these extreme sides, but no matter what he said to you, he loved you. And he did that with people. He didn't have, I'm sure he had people that were favorites and so on, like all of us have that are friends and that kind of thing. But when it came to showing the love of God, he just didn't pick favorites. And he did it with everyone. So that day when he put me in that big brown Mercury of his, and we went down to what was then known as the ghetto areas of Minneapolis. They were the place that, and during the years when everybody was fleeing to the suburbs, and you went to the suburbs because it was nicer there, and nice people went to the suburbs. But Rev wanted his church right downtown. He wanted it close to where he could go and be near these people. It was the rescue shop within a yard of hell that drove his life. And so we're in there and we walk into this apartment complex that's not nice. Not nice. I'm sure it probably was. I have no idea. I can't remember if it was a housing project or not. I can see the building a little bit and I can see the inside of the house quite clearly, inside of the apartment. But as we walked in, and I've been around these people, but mostly on the church level. They would be bussed into church, and the kids were part of our lives. And but when we walked into their home, and I watched Rev just gather them in his arms, and a mother who looked scared, I'm sure wanting her kids to turn out fine. There was no husband in the home that I recall at all, and I'm sure if he was, he wasn't there at that time. And knowing the circumstances that I knew of many of those kids, maybe they all had different fathers. I don't know for sure, but I can tell you this, it wasn't a pretty scenario. I remember food stuff all over the chairs. I remember the smells of the day. It's interesting the things you remember. But more than anything, I remember this 300-pound giant of a man, bear hugging family, and plopping down in a chair covered with food stuff without ever even thinking about it. I don't know, maybe he did, but he never showed it. And as I mentioned in the chapter, I don't remember my what I did that day. I remember watching and learning. What an incredible thing it was because he gave hope. He gave life. He gave courage wherever he went. And he did it by not thinking about himself, but about thinking about them and really truly caring. Not being afraid of their setting, not being afraid of their poverty, not being afraid of their upbringings, not being afraid of what was all around them and surrounded them, but just looking at them and caring about them. And any evil he could take out of there, he took it. Covered his backside. His heart was bigger than all of it. What an incredible thing it is. The simplicity, the simplicity of what Jesus taught us was treat others like you'd like to be treated. This isn't on an equal level with every other word that's spoken in the Bible or in the New Testament. There are words that are on a higher level. This is what everything else is built around. This is what we gain first. And if we gain this, everything else will fall into place. If we learn this, we don't have to be scholars in Greek and Hebrew. We don't have to follow every kind of religious thought. We don't have to know every doctrine. We don't have to understand and get right all the concepts of God. We will fulfill what God longs for in his kids, treating others well, just like we'd like to be treated. And God will simply say, he's done it. She's doing it right now. Look at that. And we'll be proud as can be, just like we're proud of our kids. So proud of them when they act well with others and treat them well and forgive well. What an incredible thing it is. Do you have people in your life like that? I've got lots of them, and I consider myself so fortunate because I've had so many people. Now, have I had the discouraging ones? Oh my goodness, yes. I'm grateful that for some reason, because of the wonderful early upbringing, I don't remember those people as thoroughly as I remember the ones that have been so positive in my life. What an incredible thing it is. Do you have any of those people like my 300-pound Jesus or my third grade teacher in your life? Have they shown you what it's like? There's oftentimes that we're coming out of hells in our lives. And we need somebody that's a yard from hell to help us, to give us grace. And they're not just sitting in somewhere near churches and chapel bells, but they're right down there with us in the nitty gritty. And there's always people around us that are that way. Always people around us that in their worst times, they need somebody that's there and will love them and respect them and regard them highly. Do you have any people like that in your life? I want to take a moment and just see and give you an opportunity before I move on to the next phase here, the next chapter that I want to get to today. But I want to take time for this. Do you have people like that in your life?
As you ponder that and as you respond, if you'd like to do that, I'm going to share a story that I just thought of as Ben was mentioning that it's not a story about myself, but it's a story about my sister and what she's walking right now. She was forced out of her home due to an error with the team that was redoing her roof. And they didn't cover a specific pipe one night, and it poured rain, happened to pour rain that night. Cats and dogs rain, kind of rain, and it ruined half her house basically. So half her house is now gutted out. She's the same sister that lost her husband just 2 years ago. So so some major things in her life in a very short time span. I was talking with her yesterday morning. She shared a cool story because her and her 16-year-old son now have to live elsewhere, and some friends of theirs opened their house to them, and it's in a great setting. It's kind of out in the country. She lives in Iowa, so she's enjoying the Iowa cornfields. But the rest of the story is, and that's a cool story right there, but the rest of the story is how it provided for this family. It's a couple, and the husband left just, I think earlier last week to be on a business trip for like 10 days. And the wife was kind of dreading being home by herself for this period of time. So in the midst of this couple blessing my sister, the wife of this couple was sharing to my sister, this is such a blessing to have you here. So the sharing of that, of helping each other and how it helped both of them in the midst of that, and only God could make that kind of timing happen. Um, so they were both like being Jesus to each other, if you will, if you bring this back around to what Ben has been sharing this morning about, do we have those people that act like Jesus in our lives?
How how incredible. Do any of you have something you'd like to share? Sometimes these are personal, and sometimes it's almost a thought process that I would like to get going. And one is the one this morning is this whole idea: are there people in our life that have offered grace to us at times when we've needed it? When we've been in our personal hells, when the demons of our life are cropping up, uh, are there people that have offered us grace, have cared for us, have loved us, have treated us like we'd like to be treated? If they're there, give thought to those people. And not only that, it may even be someone that you could very gratefully say thanks to now. Thanks for that time that you treated me with grace. What an awesome thing to be grateful for those people in our lives and maybe to let them know. I think that encouraging piece between us is always so important because the person that offers grace doesn't always hear a thank you for those times. And when they do, it encourages them to keep doing it. And each one of us needs that encouragement. I'm going to move on to this next chapter. Wisdom is known by our children. Because this one is a vital one to me. The whole idea of wisdom is really interesting to me. And the story that I'm using here is one that happens in the New Testament, and it's shared with us a couple of times. And it's the story of Jesus and when John is about to be beheaded, and you know, party favor, um, you know, come on, Dad, if you would just give me the head of John the Baptist here because Mom requested that, and it's during a party, so John's about to lose his head, and he's the cousin of Jesus. So his disciples, because John's had this huge impact, huge impact. Now, he's a whole lot different than Jesus. And why I use in the story the Baptist versus Presbyterians, and I don't know that you can say Baptist versus Presbyterians because I'm using them from the same family in this situation. And John is the Baptist, of course, and his disciples are on a mission. So they run to Jesus, and when they run to Jesus to find out if he's really the one that John's been saying he is, John's normal, just like you or I, has doubts. And he's about to be beheaded because of the kind of person he is. He's not afraid of saying anything. Yeah. Do you know people like that? Yeah, so do I. And anyway, so Jesus says, you go back and tell him what's going on and let him know it's okay. And so they run off. And Jesus turns to the crowd. And when he turns to the crowd, it's this funny moment of, let me tell you a family story. And would you go out in the desert to see? Yeah. And because John is baptizing people, telling them to repent. People come to him and he just gives them this sage advice, quick, easy advice. So if you're a soldier and you come to John and what do we do? John says, be happy with your wages and then don't extort from anybody. And what an interesting statement. Extortion, by the way, that's just the flip side of bribery. That's the power side. That's the side that says, just like one time when we're going through Mexico, going down to build an orphanage, and the federales stop us in the middle of nowhere, and they don't say much. They're just using their power in, do you want to go on? Uh, then give us some money. And that's extortion. And if we were to give them money, and we did, because from our side, it's not bribery until we're trying to do it to gain favors from them, but all we're really trying to do is go on at this point. So extortion is the flip side of bribery. It's trying to get somebody to give you something because you have power over them. And so John says to those soldiers, yeah, don't use your power that way. And he just gives sage advice like that. And it's always very clear. So he's in trouble because he's told Herod, that, what did you do? You took your brother's wife. He isn't afraid, kind of like Jesus. He's not afraid. He's on the other side where Jesus is just kind of giving away to anyone who needs his love. John's giving this incredible prophetic word to anybody that doesn't matter if they're king or if they're soldier or if they're tax collector. And Jesus on the one side, John on the other, almost opposite personalities, cousins. And Jesus says this wonderful thing. He said, here we are in the marketplace, and this generation's like children that are saying, oh, I'm right, you're wrong, and pointing fingers and saying, he has a demon. That was John. And to Jesus, they're saying, he's a drunkard and a glutton, and he hangs around with all the wrong kind of people, those sinners. And Jesus says, what a way to judge. You need to know something. Wisdom is known by all her children. And the first time I saw that, and it's in Luke's gospel that usually it's translated that way. And Matthew's gospel, when the story is given, the translation usually is wisdom is known by her actions, but in both cases, it's more just simply that wisdom is known by its results. And one is a little more long term than the other. I love that because this fascinating piece about that story is that the way we treat people, the way we live out our lives produces something. And Jesus is saying, you saw John and you saw what it produces. It produced repentance. And it produced people that were saying, I want to live right. And he didn't, he eat locusts and wild honey and didn't ever party. And here's Jesus, and he comes along and he parties. That he's drinking with all the sinners, and he's out there eating, and partying, and feasting, and he's doing it with prostitutes and tax collectors. And what's it producing? And in both cases, it's producing people that want to become better. They want to make their world better. Both Jesus and John accomplished this wonderful thing that Jesus says, this is the children of wisdom. We live in such a way that the world becomes better. And religion doesn't end up doing that always. Now, I don't mean by that everybody in religion is incapable of it. No, I'm just saying that it isn't religion that produces people. And people, if they live in the way that simply gives their life away to others wonderfully and teaches the others and gives the others incentive to become better people, not necessarily because they were told to be better, but because they saw something in you and they heard something from you. And you weren't doing it because you were strong, or you weren't doing it because you were giving favor to somebody because they had money, or you weren't doing it because you wanted power, but you were just simply doing it because you cared about people. And you were doing it because you wanted to make the world better. Then you're going to produce the children of wisdom, which go on to become better and better and better people. That's awesome. Now, there's questions that I had with all of this, but what do you think religion has done to us? Do you think religion produces this? To me, it's the simplicity of what we ought to be about, what Jesus came to actually bring into place, to actually make happen, in showing us what God really wanted and what he was like when he was in human form, and what we can be like and please God. And it's so simple. It isn't complex. We're not trying to make converts out of people. We're simply wanting people to be who God designed them to be, helping them become that by giving them grace. Not treating some people better because we want to get ahead. Giving grace to each one that comes into our path. Any thoughts? Any comments on this? To me, religion is complex. Following Jesus may not always seem simple, but it is simple in thought, simple in what we have to work on in our own lives, in giving grace. Any thoughts that you have?
I'll jump in here. Um, as I was reading this material and I thought about actually going back in that time and then comparing it to our current time, Jesus, Jesus almost rebelled or really stood out from the norm when you think of the religion of that time. He was different. He his ideas were a lot different. And if I bring that into our current time, I think if Jesus or something similar, somebody similar was to show up in our current time, being the way Jesus acted back then, I think I would hear terms like he's dangerous or he's wayward or don't listen to him because his ideas and thoughts are so much different than what we hear in current times potentially. So I think we would be encouraged not to follow something that's so different from what we've been trained or what we have heard or what we're used to.
I I think as I'm listening to what you're saying, Karma, I think that right at the very moment we stand in right now, in a political craziness that a good portion of us are just almost disgusted with, um, we see our responses. I think, and I hesitate to talk too much, so I certainly will be very careful with this, but when I listen to so much of those who have befriended me on Facebook and I listen to the political comments, whichever side they're on, doesn't matter which side they're on. They can be on the right or they can be on the left. And I certainly have both in my friends that are extreme on both of those. I listen to the comments and I think, oh my goodness, would we accept Jesus today any more than we would have accepted him at that time? We become very religious, very complex. We do it with God and rights. We do it with our either Republican or Democratic ideals, whatever they happen to be politically. We become very, very righteous, and it's often self-righteous, and nobody's going to take these rights from us, and nobody's going. But it all is centered around us. It's not centered around this whole idea of giving grace to others, of caring about others, about treating others like we would like to be treated. Ah, my, my. With many of the comments that I've read, I certainly wouldn't want to be Muslim in among a number of my Christian friends on Facebook because I don't think I would be treated if I was Muslim like I would like to be treated. It's really interesting. And I think that Jesus' message in our day would be treated very much like was in that day. Where when he looked at the Pharisees and the Sadducees, he says to them, you seek converts all over the world. And when you find one, you make him twice the child of hell you are. Wow. And that's why I make the kind of crazy statement in there that sometimes I've wondered if hell was a place that God created so religious people would have some place to go while the rest of us had fun in heaven. I don't, don't take that theologically, okay? That's just one of those almost fun thoughts in my mind. Sometimes when I've dealt with religion as being inside of it for so long and now outside, it's kind of like, oh my goodness. There's so many times that I've wanted to say, quit being religious. Can we just be like Jesus for a while? Any other thoughts or comments this morning? Thank you, Karma, for what you brought in too today. I want to share too. I know in one uh, there was there was a piece this morning that I thought was so good that was given to us and took place in Wharton, Texas, and it just gave us this example of flooding that had taken place in Wharton, and because I don't have their specific permission this morning to share their name, I won't share who this actually is, but they just mentioned there was a call for volunteers to help remove wallboard and insulation from the flooded homes. And on the workday, most of the volunteers were from outside of town. I think these kind of things are probably fairly normal. Seems like there's not too many people that show up, and the ones that show up, it's like they come from somewhere else oftentimes. But there were a few volunteers from Wharton, but none from the largest, most evangelical churches. Sad to say, That was my experience pastoring as well. When there would be need, it was hard to get volunteers from our evangelical churches. Of the pastors who showed up, most assigned themselves to a counseling group that did no physical labor. Yeah. There were only 3 pastors who actually did the work. And I'm going to share this because this was a story. The Methodist pastor, a pastor of a black church, and a pastor of a small evangelical church. The young lady Methodist pastor was still working hard when I quit at 4 p.m. She understood and was living the love your neighbor teaching in Luke. I would say this there. I won't mention who it is, but the Methodists were definitely one of this group. There are 3 denominations that, even though I wasn't part of any one of those 3 denominations, that I almost always found eager to live it out. This whole idea of we treat others like we'd like to be treated, and the Methodists were one. The pastors I knew, they attempted to live that out, and I want to say kudos to them on that. But then he says this: following Jesus working to make the world better is hard, dirty, and unattractive to many people. It's much easier to sell a Pharisee-like membership model, sort of like a Christian country club. Thanks for sharing that. Because I think it's very true to what we often are in religion. We like to make converts, and we like to have them come to our churches, but we haven't taught what Jesus taught. Wow.
I'd like to add to that because I liked that last comment about how sometimes when we want to be like Jesus, it can look very unattractive, hard work, etc. And I would say to balance that out, maybe on the outside it does look like that, and it feels like that on the inside sometimes as well. What does it do to us? What does it do to our souls on the inside when we're living that out? I would say it's refreshing and renewing. And my guess is it does that to the same thing, it does the same thing to the people that we're helping, what it does to the inside of those that we're helping.
Thank you, Karma. I'm going to cover next week, I think, just the one chapter. And that's the what should we do with really notorious, disreputable sinners? And I think it's got enough in it that I may stay right there. You can go on, read the rest all the way down to the next section if you want, because I may just kind of cover and refer and do some different things coming out of those chapters while I'm in what should we do with really notorious, disreputable sinners, and because I think it's something that we have not lived out well in our religious circles. Um, it's so easy for us to judge. So we're going to go there next week. I will look forward to that. Thanks so much for being part with us on this. And please do exactly what we had this week with our friend that shared thoughts with us. If you want to share any thoughts through email or whatever, do that as well with us this week. I love to have those things. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful week ahead.
And I'm going to throw out, excuse me, I'm going to throw out there really quick in the chat box, and some of you may have responded already. We put together a little survey this past week. Our intentions were to run this through the end of August and then get some feedback and kind of just discuss among us as well how do we want to move forward. So if you haven't yet responded on that questionnaire, we'd love to hear your responses. That will help us on making a decision on moving forward, and if we do move forward, how that might look. So just click on the link I just put out there in the chat box, and they'll take you to the questionnaire. All right. So again, thank you to all of you for joining us. We love having you on board with us on Sunday mornings. And we have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next Sunday morning.